I am Hunter Danson.
And I am Eric Lintela. And welcome back to We Can Change It If We Want.
We did change it.
What?
What
do you say?
We changed it already. It's raise a glass now.
Oh, like to freedom?
Well, not exactly.
Oh, so it's a drinking podcast. We're going to talk about beer and
Well, not exactly. Just at the beginning. I mean, it doesn't have to be beer, but it's whatever we're talking about, we're raising a glass, or depending on what we're talking about, we're pouring one out.
okay. So like, can you give me an example?
Like, if we were talking about the Aragon movie, I would be pouring one out for Christopher Paolini.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Like the author?
Yeah, the author of Aragon.
Oh, see, I would raise a glass to him. I mean, he was 18 when he wrote it, but I'd definitely pour one out for that movie. That was rough stuff.
Yeah, well, I'd pour one out for him because of the movie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Raise a glass. Okay, I like it. Let's go with it.
Yeah. So I have a glass here. It's a Left Hand Brewing milk stout, nitro milk stout.
Nice. Oh, wow, and you're even drinking it with the pinky raised. I like it. And while you drink your beer left-handed, I today I'm using a Genesee Brewhouse cup, but it's because I broke in one of my moves my Guinness glass, and in honor of the British heritage of the person we will be raising a glass to, or maybe pouring one out for, today I'm drinking a Guinness. I know he's not Irish, but I know Ireland's not in the UK, but it's still it's well drunk within the British the islands, and so that's what I got.
All right.
And I'm wearing my Guinness shirt, so
yes.
Lovely day for Guinness.
Yeah. When is it? Is there ever not a lovely day for a Guinness?
That's a good question. I've yet to meet one of those days, but especially on one of these rainy type nights, it's
yeah. Well, we mentioned on the last one we were thinking about doing Tolkien, and since the Rings of Power are out now, it seemed natural to talk to. I'm gonna take another drink and then.
There's no right or wrong way to be the center.
Yeah,
just We're not talking to to an audience. We're talking to each other. Yes, the beginning was a little bit more staged, but we're gonna dive into it. And
okay, I will let you be you, and I will be me.
Be you.
So today we're gonna be raising a glass to Tolkien.
Something you can never take away.
Very true. And rather than just go right into the Rings of Power, I don't want this to be well, personally I don't like doing reactions and stuff, but I would much rather talk about Tolkien himself and most of his work before we talk about the show if we have time.
That's a good point. Yeah, you're right. We're not a 10 out of 10, 9 out of 10 type podcast. We learned that last episode. And I think that's really a good point.
I don't like stars. I went through a period of time where I was trying to do book reviews and have them in kind of a structured way, and I found out quickly that it's really hard once a book clears a certain level of quality and coherence. It's really hard to kind of to get to put a number on it. I think, and honestly, I don't think it's a very worthwhile question. I think a much more worthwhile question is why did I react this way to this thing? Why did it impact me this way?
Yeah. Some of my favorite movies are the movies that the ranking wise, I would give terrible rankings, but in reality, they're just movies that I'd go back to and recommend other people to watch. Sometimes because they're so bad, but sometimes also because of the heartfelt aspects of them.
Mm.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned Tolkien. Let's dive in. Let's talk about Tolkien. I don't know when you were first introduced to Tolkien. I mean, what was your experience of Tolkien? Who is Tolkien to you? Who are you to Tolkien? Tell me. I want to know.
That is, who am I to Tolkien? Who are we? Who are all of us compared to Tolkien, really? But my first experience with Tolkien was, um, I went to a kind of a granola private school in Vermont. I'm very glad I went there because I it helped establish a love for learning,
Mm,
and reading was cool. Everyone at the school was always reading something, and
love that.
Lord of the Rings. Our teacher used to read to us at snack time, and so my earliest like concrete memory of Tolkien is listening to my teacher read The Hobbit, um, and
Sweet.
it was it was it's The Hobbit. The first sentence is, in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit, and that's all you need. And he has that little bit about the game of golf being invented
Mm,
by
love that.
one of the great, um, oh, what is it? What is this? One of the Proudfoots or something. What is his name? Forget. But he lops off
Do
an
you know there
orc's
was
head
once
in
a
it.
hobbit so big he could ride a pony?
Yeah, yeah,
I forgot that story. Thanks for sharing that.
yeah. So that's my first memory, and of course, after The Hobbit, we went to Lord of the Rings,
Mm,
um, which I just remember being in school with my friend group, and we were all just all about Lord of the Rings. Um, my my friend and I had this imaginary game that we would play outside. Um, it was called Reign of Terror, but we were fighting orcs, and there were dragons and stuff, and
as you do.
yeah, I just wanted to be in that world. And so, I mean, through my childhood, I learned to love Lord of the Rings, and um, I think I still love it, but I love it in different ways, and I think
Mm,
um, maybe deeper ways. But I want to hear your earliest contact, first
yeah.
contact.
First contact. Oh my goodness. I as this as we've gotten ready for this podcast, I have been getting more and more excited because I can't think of anything um, that I would rather talk about in terms of fantasy literature than Tolkien. Because Tolkien to me has meant, um, when I think of Tolkien, I think of family. Um,
Mm.
you brought up learning, listen, your first experience with The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings being in school. My first experience was with Lord of the Rings when I was newer between 4 and 6 or 7 years old. Um, I have a couple older siblings, and my dad, who grew up loving Lord of the Rings, used to read it to us before we went to bed. And my siblings are 5 and 6 years older than me, and so and they weren't as interested in it as me. And so I grew up um, with Tolkien, meaning relationship with my dad. And I grew up in a house
Mm.
where, and this didn't happen every year, but it happened enough years that in my mind it's a family tradition that I want to continue. Um, the my dad and mom have The Hobbit on record player, and I remember on multiple occasions on Christmas Eve or before Christmas, us as a family listening to The Hobbit on record player while we were baking cookies for Christmas. What else? I mean, we'll talk about it as we go through, but Lord of the Rings came out, the movies, while we were growing up, and I think the first one came out in 2001. And I was 8 years old, 7, 8 years old. My family went to the opening showing of every movie. I grew up in a house where when there were hard moments in my life, and there were many, and when I had nightmares, I would want to watch Lord of the Rings and the Fellowship of the Ring or the Two Towers. That opening melody of the Shire. I it feels like it's part of me, and oh man, I could go on. I am going to go on different parts in this podcast, and as we talk more about it.
Did you have any of the action figures?
I did. I had a Legolas, and I had the Chief Uruk-hai in the first in the Fellowship of the Ring. So the one with the one that ends up killing spoiler alert, killing Boromir.
I had that one too.
Mm-hmm. I think I probably had Boromir too. I don't have any idea where they are anymore. They're probably in a landfill somewhere. Sorry, environment. But
those were the gifts to give in my friend circle in school. We would try to figure out like which action figure they didn't have yet, because they were really detailed, and they were really well done.
Yeah,
and we loved them. So I had a ring wraith and a Galadriel. Ooh. And
nice.
I had a Frodo and Sam in their disguise when they're in Mordor.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So they had like orc helmets and stuff, and I used to stage these like dioramas in my room. They weren't too impressive, but I would just kind of make these scenarios. Galadriel would be hitting a ring wraith with her vase, because they gave Galadriel
things that are,
yeah,
things that were, and some things which have not yet come to pass. I actually had and still do. I'm in my attic right now. Hundreds of Lord of the Rings cards. Ooh. I don't know if you knew that Lord of the Rings cards were a thing. But I had Lord of the Rings cards. I had Lord of the Rings chess set, which I am so sad I do not have anymore, because it was epic. Played many a game of chess on that, and now and I'm ashamed to say I haven't played them yet, because I got them from Goodwill for like $3 each. I have Lord of the Rings chess and Lord of the Rings checkers. Nope. That neither of those things were the correct statements. I have Lord of the Rings Monopoly and Lord of the Rings Risk, not Lord of the Rings Chess and Checkers. Yeah. Sorry, community. Didn't mean to lie there.
Community.
Fellowship,
yes.
Yeah,
our imaginary fellowship.
Hey, maybe someday we'll have one for each of the Elven rings.
I had a one ring.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I had a one ring on a chain.
I actually am currently holding up a one ring bookmark. That actually has a piece that I braided on, because I was super skilled with embroidery floss. So in case anybody's wondering, definitely make those bracelets. Not the fancy ones that are like flat, just the circular ones. My sister was the skill. Oh man, Hunter, I just showed you a couple of the things around me. I would love to tell you and show you and some of our other listeners the other Lord of the Rings things I've gathered. Um, so I have, like I said, I was very excited about this episode. I have the Lord of the Rings trilogy in one.
Oh
Of
yeah.
course, this is a relatively new book. Nothing fancy. Probably from what is this? 1994. Nothing too. But before no, it's got
I have a more recent all-in-one volume.
yeah. I also have the Lord of the Rings box set
Uh-huh.
with Elijah Wood.
Oh yeah.
Um, oh my goodness,
I can't see the name. I
who
can't
plays
see if we.
Legolas? Plays
Oh,
Legolas.
Orlando Bloom.
Orlando Bloom, duh, and Viggo Mortensen.
Yeah.
And then and I have the Hobbit, but this is not of any of the actors. This is Gandalf walking.
Oh.
I also have a book that I got from my dad that he read, and now I have again for whatever reason. It's Tolkien, the Lost Road and Other Writings. I have not yet read this book. I'm a little ashamed to hold it up. And then really these are the couple things I'm really excited about. One, I have a copy of The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, from my father. I was just
Ah.
looking it up. Sorry, you can hear the pages, rustle. That's it. From, and I kid you not, 1965 in front of me. And then lastly, I have a
Wow.
hardcover of the Silmarillion, which I have read the first quarter of
Oh
multiple
yeah.
times, and the last three quarters of no times. Sorry for those were whatever. From 1977. Um, I have something else, but I'll show that a little bit later. Um, I've actually a couple other things. So I would consider myself a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I have the Blu-ray set upstairs. It was one of the first set of Blu-rays I got. But a Lord of the Rings fan and a Tolkien fan in maybe a little bit different way than others. The way I've learned my
Hmm.
memory works, I don't memorize things. So if you asked me like to quote a certain thing, I probably couldn't. Um, you hear me say I've started the Silmarillion multiple times. I have not gotten all the way through it for a few different reasons. Um, it's just not the way my mind works.
Hmm.
Um, I'm much more tied to the emotion of the thing, and that for me is Tolkien.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Tolkien tells a story, and Tolkien told a story that spoke to my dad.
Hmm.
And so in many ways, the Tolkien and Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit are pieces that, for me, convey the father son bond, and are
Hmm.
something that I'm excited to share with my son as he gets a little bit older. Maybe not 5 months old, maybe a couple years at least. But I went on a little bit longer. I would love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on what the writings of Tolkien mean to you, Hunter. You talked a little bit earlier about your relationship with Tolkien changing over time, and you said maybe I think you said deeper or something like that.
Yeah. I always loved Tolkien as a little kid, and I've reread it a few times in my life, and I guess when I was a child, I basically worshipped Lord of the Rings, especially when the movies were coming out. Uh, I
Mm.
I wanted to be an actor because I wanted to be Viggo Mortensen. Uh, I thought it would be the coolest thing in the world to have all of these people pay a bunch of money to dress you up, make you look like Aragorn, give you a sword, and like just that's like every kid's. That was my dream when I was playing all of my pretend games. Um, and I think as it went on, I read the Silmarillion. I can't probably in high school sometime, um, and I was just absorbed by his world. Whenever told people why I love Lord of the Rings, and why I love Tolkien. I was like, oh, he created a whole world. He created languages, which, I think, yes, there's the world building, which is beautiful and wonderful, but I think like the most impressive thing are the languages, because just as like an intellectual exercise to create a language, like learning a language is hard. Creating a language is something else. And he himself, they're not like fully fleshed out languages. He didn't wasn't able to invent like a full, you know 10,000 word vocabulary, but
Got further than most
um,
people.
yeah, he sketched the structure of the language and gave it rules and grammar, um, and he was a philologist, so he knew how to do that, and he knew languages very well. Um,
That's the word.
which,
Philologist.
yeah,
Sorry for those of you who listened to our last episode. Philologist. That is the occupation of the primary character in uh, C.S. Lewis's space trilogy. And so, just a fun little tidbit there. So, the joys of philology.
yes, love of language. But I think as I got older, yes, I still appreciate languages, and I think it it lends such a consistency to the world building. But talking about the Lord of the Rings specifically, I really came to appreciate the story that he told in the trilogy. Um, Starting in The Hobbit, and coming to fruition in the trilogy of Frodo and the Ring. Um, because people often, when they talk about fantasy, they always recognize Tolkien, but usually they're talking about like, well, this is a very kind of cliche example, but it's cliche because I've heard it so many times. They're talking about how gritty Game of Thrones is,
Mm.
and they're like, oh yeah, Lord of the Rings was just about good versus evil. It was very black and white, and but Game of Thrones is all gray. It's more like human nature, and we might get into some of that when we talk about Rings of Power. But um, I always got annoyed, and I still get annoyed because
Mm-hmm.
Tolkien has a lot of nuance in his story. You have kind of gray characters like Boromir, who um, does good and then also does bad, and then there's Gollum, which is the biggest his biggest example of a great character, because you know it's this struggle against temptation, and Frodo actually Frodo isn't a chosen one. He's a chosen one because he is not, because he's a a normal person trying to live his life, and he sees this responsibility that he needs to take up, and he takes the choice. He doesn't
Mm.
good is evil is not defeated because good is so much stronger. In fact, Frodo actually, as far as he gets the ring, he fails. He fails to cast it into Mount Doom. He decides to keep the ring, and it's only because Gollum is there, only because of this
Mm.
kind of stray chance of grace, that the ring eventually falls into Mount Doom and is destroyed.
Yeah.
And I think that is a beautiful story. It's a beautiful plot, and I think it shows kind of Tolkien's own worldview. But I think it is also a great example of how the Lord of the Rings really has so much nuance in it. It's really not just a quote unquote black and white story, even though it has that element of good versus evil.
Yeah. I love that. In order to get kind of prepared for this, I started rereading, and I haven't quite finished yet because it's a long chapter. What I think is one of the best chapters in all of the trilogy, and it is the Council of Elrond. I think that it is also one of the examples of why people, when they have read a lot of contemporary fantasy and want to read more fantasy and decide to read Lord of the Rings, I think it's a good example of why they stop,
Hmm.
because it is not written like contemporary fantasy. It's not a scrap morsels that you can devour and then jump on to the next piece. It's something that forces you to um, read slowly. It's something that drags together or pulls together these pieces that have been working for years, decades, centuries.
Hmm.
And then it includes, and this is something that Tolkien does time and time again, that I'm sure for too many people can be frustrating, but I love some beautiful poetry and songs. And I'm just going to read this one little piece because I think it speaks a little bit to what you're saying, Hunter. Um, and it was written by, in the story, it was written by Bilbo. Um, and here it is. All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken. A light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be blade that was broken. The crownless again shall be king. I mean, oof. And that gem, that Silmaril, is buried in the beautiful dynamic mountain that is the story being told around it, and it's something that's drawing together Boromir and Aragorn and Gloin and Legolas and Gandalf and Frodo and Elrond and so many characters um, into this one
Hmm.
piece, um, and then the story that's being told around it. It's just it's a feast.
Yeah, and even today, with all of the work that has been inspired with Tolkien, I went back and I started rereading some of the Silmarillion, and um, there's there is really nothing like Tolkien, and I don't think that there will be, unless there is some philologist out there who is totally immersed in myth and ancient sources,
Mm.
because that's what
Yeah.
Tolkien studied a lot. He wrote he he was a professor of language, and he studied Old English and other languages, and he was immersed in the world of um, Beowulf and Kalevala, I think, which is like a
Oh, I was going to
Finnish
talk about that. I
story.
love that you got there before me.
Yeah, and so that's what he was drawing from, because it didn't spring from nothing. He was drawing from this ancient tradition of history, and I think that's what, for me, really makes Tolkien unique, and what makes Lord of the Rings, gives it so much weight. Because if you've never gone back and read like an ancient myth or something, I highly recommend it, because it is like nothing else. Like, a lot of times the things that endure for a reason, and this that feeling of epicness is not something that you
Mm.
get from just shocking spectacle or pretty special effects or anything. I don't know. It's hard to put a finger on, but when I read The Lord of the Rings, and I read these ancient stories that have thousands and thousands of years um, behind them, is the kind of feeling that I get. Um, can I just? This might be, you won't get this on any other podcast, but I'm going to read just a little bit of Beowulf. Actually, I mean, you might get it on there, but I just wanted to read like a couple lines of Beowulf, just to kind of make an attempt at trying to explain what I'm talking about.
Go for it.
Okay. The life and death of Skilled. Lo, the Spear Dane's glory through splendid achievements. The Folk King's former fame we have heard of, how princes displayed then their prowess in battle. Oft skilled the skeffing from scathers in numbers, from many a people their mead benches tore, since first he found him friendless and wretched. The Earl had had terror, comfort he got for it, waxed neath the welkin, world honour gained, till all his neighbours o'er sea were compelled to bow to his bidding and bring him their tribute.
Mm. Yeah, that tells a story into itself.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I wanna kind of jump in with a little bit of the thing that I'm sure our listeners have already noticed. One, yes, we're talking a little bit about Tolkien's life, but there are already movies and stories, and I mean there are interviews you can hear with Tolkien, as well as plenty of literature out there about Tolkien's life. His friendship with C.S. Lewis, his faith. There's we're not really going to be talking about we've talked a little bit about that, but that's not the goal of this. You also have probably noticed, I've noticed it. We are both one might use the word fanboys of Tolkien, which can be a problem, especially since both of us are there. That could maybe prevent some of the beautiful combat that might be the case in other episodes more clearly. But I think that
beautiful combat.
That one of the beauties of this is that we get to, I mean, this is one of those things that brought the two of us together in our friendship. And actually, that's one thing I wanted to say to you, Hunter, is happy anniversary. Because it was about 11 years ago today that we met. 11 years ago inclusive, so as of 2012.
Okay.
It's about 11 years ago today, which is actually, so we've known each other for 10 years. And that is somewhere around this week, maybe a week or two from now. I couldn't figure out the specific date.
I don't.
But we met in a cabin in the woods, on a piece of land 40 minutes away from the college we were both attending as freshmen.
And there are lots of other people around there too.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, that might be another important date as far as people you've met.
Yeah. Someone
near and dear to you.
Yes, someone near and dear to me. My best friend.
So what? 10 years. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it's hard to grasp 10 years.
Yeah. I think in those 10 years, I have learned how to give space through our friendship. Like the fact that I just waited like 5 seconds before responding. And I didn't even count how many seconds it was. I'm just doing it based off of how big I see the space being. That's because of you. So
yeah, I've learned how to banter, how to take things a little less heavy.
Oh, I had something I wanted to say about that. Not that specifically for you, but I heard somebody say this week, and it really struck me, and I think it's one of the joys of why Merry and Pippin are in Lord of the Rings. This person was saying, sometimes we just take ourselves too seriously. And he was talking about that in relation to being kind of in emotional states, and just in times we're just like we just take ourselves too seriously. Sometimes we got to remember that even when life is serious around us, like we don't need to take ourselves too seriously.
Yeah. Sit back and have smoke a leaf of the old Toby, blow a smoke ring. And for those of you wondering, old Toby is not a euphemism for marijuana. It is a leaf that they smoke in the Lord of the Rings.
See, this is one of those pieces for why I shared earlier the way my memory is not like a specific things. Hunters is much more along that state. So
Don't give
I'm
me too
glad we
much
can.
credit. I I remember I had this game that I played. It was Lord of the Rings: The Third Age on the GameCube, and
Oh man.
it was like basically Final Fantasy. Well, it was like turn-based combat, you know, kind of like Final Fantasy, but even more like pretty simplified a lot from Final Fantasy.
Ha,
Um,
oh, he,
yeah,
ha.
and it was like a turn-based kind of game where you followed in the tracks of the Fellowship, starting from the first movie all the way to the end. So you have a boss fight with Sauron at the end. Um,
That's cool.
Maybe even Gollum. I can't remember, but no, I think it was with Sauron. It was with the Eye. But there was one item called the Leaf of Old Toby, or like the bag of Old Toby, and it would restore your mana, your so you could cast spells.
So it was like stronger than Lambus bread.
Yeah, well, Lembas restored health, I think, or if it was in there, I don't remember. But
Oh man, Hunter, I want to tell you a story here.
hmm.
I was helping my parents move in to a new house this past weekend, and I saw a book of VHSs, and I'm just thinking about it now. One of those VHSs, unless they threw it away, and I don't think they did, includes one of those good old taped over type things um, of the sneak peek of the Two Towers that my family watched when it watched the sneak peek, however many weeks or months before the movie came out.
Mm.
We not only watched it together as a family, we recorded it. And I specifically remember the scene that they show in it is of it's when the people of Rohan are fleeing to Helm's Deep, and Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli ride ahead, and they notice the wargs, the
Mm-hmm.
warg riders out there, and Legolas does that thing where he
Oh
grabs
yeah.
onto one side of the warg and he flips or of the horse and he
Yep.
flips around, um, and like that was the scene they showed, and like a little bit of the making behind that
Mm.
movie, and that was like a family event,
Yeah.
in my house.
I think it is impossible to understate the amount of hype that there was for Lord of the Rings for
And
kids
they
like
hold
us.
up.
They do,
They
yeah.
hold up. I
Yeah, I
mean,
was.
because they didn't lean on CGI. They leaned on real like people and real settings. And when they did the CGI, they were the ones. I guess Peter Jackson, and his cast, like they created the idea of Gollum, like the idea of Andy Serkis like doing the actions of Gollum while wearing a green suit and all of those different dots, like to
Mhm.
then have Gollum do that. Like they were the first to do that, and it holds up. It's not like wow, that's the newest cutting technology, but it's not something that you look at and cringe at, or even it's not even something you look at and like do a double take. It just
Yeah,
feels
I
natural.
mean, the effects are in service of the story. It's the point was not to wow people with the special effects. It was to bring Tolkien's world to life
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and tell his story.
Mm. Let me tell you how they did that. Howard Shore. Howard Shore.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of great composers of film score, especially, and there are more famous ones, but Howard Shore. May it be that song at the end of the Fellowship. May it be the even star shines down upon you. I cannot tell you how many hundreds of times I've listened to that song. Like, actually hundreds of times. In college, the Lord of the Rings soundtrack, my freshman year, I mean, it's still on my iPod Shuffle or my iPod Touch upstairs.
Mm-hmm.
It is, half of the songs on it are Lord of the Rings. And every night, every morning, like, my alarm in college would be whatever came on in Shuffle. And like 50% of the time, I was waking up to Howard Shore and and it just so happened that my freshman year roommate in college was also a huge Lord of the Rings fan. That was one of the only things that we really connected on. He was an awesome guy, great roommate, probably a much better roommate than I was. But we every morning would wake up to it, and there was at least one morning where I remember waking up, and he had the same experience that morning. We probably woke up like 10 minutes after my alarm went off because it was playing Lord of the Rings. And I remember waking up having just dreamed about Lord of the Rings and saying, yo, man, and then I realized my alarm went off. And he also had some type of memory of Lord of the Rings just because of the way it seeped into us.
Yeah.
And so like, that's one of those things. It's I think Lord of the Rings was for us what Marvel is for so many kids growing up, and maybe what Star Wars was for previous generations, or maybe even more specifically, what Harry Potter was for other people that are maybe around our age or the year, a few years younger or older.
Yeah.
For the two of us, though, it was Lord of the Rings.
I mean, it will always be Lord of the Rings.
Sounds like a rom-com. You had me at Nazgul. That's what I'm talking about.
One thing I've not learned is how to do puns. I've tried and it just doesn't. I can't keep up.
The Sam old story.
If only I was wise enough.
Good try. I like it.
I tried. Well,
so you go for it.
I don't know. I don't know if this fits in. I have to cut it out. But
what were we thinking about?
Well, you said how Lord of the Rings is for us what Marvel is for people today. And my reaction was, hold on, it's more than Marvel for me. Just and maybe that's just because I don't understand how much people love Marvel, but I guess as I get older, when I was younger, a lot of it was about the movies, or a lot of the love was kind of directed towards the movies. When I thought of Aragorn or Frodo, I thought of Elijah Wood and Viggo. But I think as I've gotten older and kind of returned to reread some of the books and returned to Tolkien's world, I'm coming back to Tolkien himself and his writing. And I think that is a thing that will always last with me, because there is only one name on my fantasy authors list, and that's Tolkien, because I don't have room for any other names. Like, to me, the comparison, people try to make comparisons with George and Tolkien, and I just think they're very different. And Tolkien was first, and I'm not trying to say that Tolkien is better, but I love him because of how he was so steeped in mythology. He wasn't just trying to tell a story about dragons and good and evil and orcs and stuff. He was creating a world, and I believe it might be in an essay or a letter or something. um, he mentioned that to create a fantasy world, you have to like discover it inside yourself.
Hmm.
And I was listening to like this interview in like the 60s with him, and they asked him, how long have you been working on Lord of the Rings? And he says, well, I've always been working on it.
Hmm.
And because I think part of it is because I have tried to write a fantasy story. Um, and when you start trying to write, you realize that it's not about the nuts and bolts of writing. It's not you can't really design a perfect world. You
Hmm.
can't design a perfect story. Finding a story and finding a world and finding characters is like you uncover them in yourself. It's like doing archaeology inside of you. And I think Tolkien, more than any fantasy author, understood that and discovered that. Um, but hey, that's a long tangent.
No, I appreciate that. I think that speaks. For those of you who don't know, Hunter is an author. His books out there. Dawn Must Follow Night. Find it, Hunter Danson, Dansin, on Amazon, or find him on YouTube. Dawn Must Follow Night. Great book. Sequel is on its way out. And so I really appreciate hearing your perspective on that as somebody who has published, written, who has gone through the entire process with this and self-published. I appreciate that, um, and you feel that. I honestly think that your earlier statement of there can't be another Lord of the Rings is true. And there can be a lot of more Marvels, and that's part of the way that Marvel is set up. Um, but even my favorite fantasy series of all time, which is not Lord of the Rings, was finished by a different author, and it could be. Lord of the Rings couldn't be finished by a different author. That's
Mm.
why they're the unfinished tales. And there are a lot of reasons behind that, um, uh, and I don't think it's just because Tolkien was a saint, or maybe I don't even know if he was especially skilled, but I think he, along with many other fantasy authors of his day, and I'm sure there are those out there nowadays. I just haven't spent as much time reading them yet. Um, wrote as an outpouring of the skill sets and hearts they had, like Frank Herbert or C.S. Lewis. I'm sure there are many others, and maybe my list is too old, too white, and too male. And hopefully over time that will continue to grow, um, as I'm introduced to more authors, and as we talk about more.
Ursula K. Le Guin. There's a good name.
Okay, love it. But yeah, instead of throwing myself too far under the bus, I want to share a couple other pieces. We still haven't talked about Rings of Power. We will get there. This might be just a little bit longer episode. We will get there.
It's Lord of the Rings.
We'll get there soon.
So
Yeah. Well, this is
if there's
Tolkien. We're
anything
not
that
even.
deserves a little more time, yeah, it's Tolkien.
We might even have to do separate ones later on some of the different Lord of the Rings. I just wanted to share a couple other things
Yeah.
that were on my list of interactions with Lord of the Rings and Tolkien. Just I don't know, a few more. One, I had a friend in college made me a speak friend and enter sign following the Fellowship of the Ring. And so I had a sign on my door as a freshman, I think all the way through senior. I actually was looking for it so I could put it on my door today. I didn't find it in time. It said Menador. Of course, from the movies. And I'm sure there are some true Tolkien fans out there that hear this and they're saying, "Oh, that's not right from the book, so it's not the real thing." And that's one of those things that's challenging because so much of this, for me, so much of Tolkien is interrelated between books, movies, conversations, relationships. I remember multiple times I've in high school and college like watched through all extended movies together in a marathon. My wife and I think while we were dating, engaged, and married, read Lord of the Rings out loud to each other on our long drives. I would spend time reading, and she would drive, and we worked through it. I in fact even have a Lord of the Rings inspired tattoo, which might be too far. I don't know. And then
That's
I
not too far.
recently, not too far. Okay.
Not far enough.
More to follow, maybe, probably not. As of a couple of years ago, more specifically, as of no, it doesn't have the date on it. As of a couple of years ago, I had a friend send me or give me a present that he had found with his wife while they were exploring some of the back alleys of the city they're in. One might call it dumpster diving, but they're exploring. He sent me these weird contraptions. They're these little plastic boxes that have little plastic boxes in them, and they make sound. In fact, he sent me the Lord of the Rings limited edition on Tolkien's 100th birthday in 1992. The J.R.R. Tolkien's classic trilogy produced by the Mind's Eye. And I'm just going to play for you the very beginning of The Fellowship of the Ring on cassette. I hope this works through.
The Mind's Eye. Radio 2000 presents The Lord of the Rings, Part 1, by J.R.R. Tolkien. And now, The Lord of the Rings, Part 1, A Long-Expected Party. When Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 11th birthday.
It is a treat. I have made it through right towards the end of the Two Towers. It is not a word for word retelling, as you can tell. Yeah. But it is beautiful. There are voices, there are actors, there is music. There is that beautiful A Mind's Eye introduction. It is a gem. And yes, that was on an actual cassette tape. That was my family's back from when I was growing up. So one day when my son hears this, I will show you what it is. I'm sure at that point you will have your own recorded videos on phones that will seem of absolutely no comparison to this flimsy plastic device. But it's such a beautiful thing. What did you think of that? Did you see that one coming? Have you heard that, Hunter? Have we talked about this?
You sent that to me, yes, and it is magic.
Well, Hunter, we have hit that point in the in our conversation where I would like to hear your initial thoughts on the first two initial episodes of the Rings of Power. As there will likely be many people that will be listening to this who have not seen the show. I don't want to dive too much into the depths of it. Let's also remember it's the first two episodes of a show. It's the introduction. It's starting the story. We'll see where it goes from here. But I would love to hear your thoughts. I'll then share my thoughts. We can have a little bit of banter about it, and then we'll let the story continue down some other hobbit hole on some other day.
Yeah. So I have emptied my glass which I'm not sure what that signifies about. I've emptied a glass of beer for the Rings of Power for Tolkien. But I think it does kind of signify my reaction because I wanted to like it. I came in wanting to like it. I love Tolkien. I love Lord of the Rings. I was cautiously optimistic because of the amount of money they spent on it. The trailers looked okay. But from the first monologue, I came away disappointed because they went through, as far as I can tell, where they are in the timeline. They went through about 200 pages of the Silmarillion in the first 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And that means they went over the beginning of the world, the whole war with Melkor, and so much stuff. And Turin, the story of Turin, which I thought when I heard they were doing a show, I was like, oh, they're going to do the story of Turin-Bar, the children of Húrin. And because of all the things in like the Silmarillion, I feel like Turin's story it's kind of like a Greek tragedy, but it has a lot of narration and it's fairly detailed compared to the rest of the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So if I thought they were doing a TV show, they could do that. And I personally really like the story of Turin. It is sad, and it's a tragedy. But I think that's partly why I like it, because it has that kind of weight of tragedy that some Greek tragedies do, that you can't stop thinking about it. And it has a dragon, Glaurung. Yeah. It's he has a cool name. They call him Mormagil, the Black Sword, because he has this black sword and sword talks. But getting none of that. The dialogue about like light and dark and shadow and all of that was fine, but I don't recollect Tolkien ever writing that. And it's not that it's like totally against the spirit of what he wrote, but it's just it doesn't it didn't really do it for me. And also I think I tend to dislike spectacle for spectacle's sake.
Mm-hmm.
And
there's some spectacle in this show.
I laughed out loud when you sent me, after like the first 10 minutes, you were like, I think I just blinked. Because that was the intro. And
yeah,
they're doing this like big dramatic monologue and over all this like incredible CGI, and like they spent $1 billion on this show.
Close to it.
Yeah. And no, really, like I looked up the number that everyone has been saying is like on all 5 seasons, like $1 billion, over $1 billion, literally. And but they're doing this big intro voiceover stuff, and I just kept thinking about the intro to the Fellowship of the Ring in the beginning, where it's just a black screen, and then Galadriel says, "Ye amar prestar ein," the world is changed. Han methona nen, I can feel it in the water. Han methona hai, I can feel it in the earth. Achanoston net, I can smell it in the air. And then it's just like, it is so much more powerful than these like, I don't know, $300 million CGI effects, and I I wanted to like it. I really did. And there were moments and performances that I liked. I feel like I have to say this because it's like a buzz topic. I don't care. I think the dumbest criticism you can make is having elves of color and people of color in Lord
Mm.
of the Rings. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
think I think the play Hamilton proved that it really doesn't. It's fine. And of all of the portrayals of elves, I actually liked Arendir the most. I liked his actor. I thought his portrayal of an elf, I believed him the most
Hmm.
because, and except like maybe Galadriel, I liked Galadriel. I thought Galadriel was good, but
Yeah.
when I saw Elrond, and even when I saw Galadriel's brother for the first time, I was like, why does he look like a pop star? And why does his hair look like Harry Styles? Or I don't know. It was just like
You said that. I think that was actually word for word.
I couldn't get over it. But and I tried. I really tried. But it just now I can understand why. But we'll get your perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Um. So I agree with a good amount of what you said. As far as the spectacle and maybe the impact of it. And my favorite part of the Silmarillion, and I have not finished the Silmarillion yet. I've shared that a few times. I've started it multiple times. But the first few pages are just I love because the first few pages are pure theology. If you've read the Silmarillion and you don't think theology, then pick up a Bible. Just start reading. Read some of Romans. I'd recommend.
Mythical theology. Yeah.
So Genesis. It is beautiful. Oh my goodness, this idea of music, singing the world and creation, and the addition of dissonance. I mean, we're both musicians. That definitely impacts me a lot. I was sad that they didn't dive into that. And maybe they will as the show goes on. But I expected, and I had heard before the show started, and so it's not the type of show that you watch with the Silmarillion in hand. And part of that I've heard is because they're going to be bringing together stories that are told multiple thousands of years apart into the same time period for the sake of being able to tell the stories. But what mattered to me when watching this show, because I knew regardless of whether I like it or not, I will watch it. Partially because it's Lord of the Rings base, it's Tolkien base, but partially because I just know it's spectacular. And it's spectacular. There's nobody could make an argument that it's not spectacular to watch. But for me, what mattered was that they captured the spirit of Tolkien in the way the story is told. And I'm sure there are many points where the spirit of Tolkien are not captured in the show, as I'm sure was true in the movies too. But the telling of the story, what I will give this show, and it's been getting a lot of flack, and I can't tell how much of that is just people trying to jump on a bandwagon and be obnoxious, and Elon Musk being Elon Musk. But I felt like
Elon Musk.
yeah, he's got all sorts of things about.
Why do
Yeah,
people care about what Elon Musk thinks about Lord
right.
of the Rings?
Great question. Why did good question. Lord of the Rings X, SpaceX.
He wants to put it on his Tesla that he launches.
Mm-hmm. Hello Tesla R. But for me, what mattered is that, and I think that this show captured it, is if you took a screenshot and paused it at any point, you would feel like you were, in comparison to other shows and movies, experiencing Tolkien. And what I mean by that is, at any point when I pause it, whether it be a climactic battle or calm scene, and partially because of the vast Tolkien's way of pushing those two things together, like intensity and then calm, and then the calm telling the intensity. I did not feel like at any point whereas I watching something George R. Martin based, something Robert Jordan based, something J.K. Rowling based, something C.S. Lewis based. Yes, there were similarities because they're fantasy. But at any point, if I pause it, I'd be like, yeah, this is Tolkien. And part of it was in the way they chose to focus on good and evil. Part of it was in the way that they focused on the internal struggles of characters, because that's one thing Tolkien does so much, that internal struggle. Part of it was just in the beauty of the surroundings and letting silence be silence. And I think Tolkien does that. It's hard to master silence in a written work. But the way that Tolkien tells his stories involves a pace. You're not going to speed through them. You can't run through Lord of the Rings like you could run through other fantasy series.
That's why the
And
poetry is there.
yeah, and I think that many aspects of this first two episodes, and again, it's starting to build a world. I think many aspects of these episodes, regardless of whether we were talking with elves, humans, halflings, dwarves, wizards, like involved and pushed time to reflect and time to be quiet.
I want to share this quote from this letter by Tolkien to Milton Waldman, who I think was involved in like the publishing, and it's about the why Tolkien actually felt that a lot of the content in the Silmarillion should be thought of as integrally connected to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, more than just like a prequel or something like that. But so he kind of summarizes the first, second, and third ages, and I thought this was a kind of an ironic quote, considering that the Rings of Power is set during the Second Age, because Tolkien says the next cycle deals, or would deal, with the Second Age, but it is on Earth a dark age, and not very much of its history is, or need be, told. And I'm not saying that the show shouldn't exist, but I just question the extravagance and the amount of time that they spend on characters who Tolkien didn't write. And I don't know. I mean, we'll see how they connect with
Yeah, we will.
the rest of, throughout the season. But, I mean, a large part of it, I'm just kind of bummed. I'm really bummed that we're not getting any Turin. But, I mean, they showed the sword.
We might.
Which might be, but the thing that I was confused about too was they make a big deal out of how peaceful everything is, and Gil-galad's obsessed with his peace. But as far as I can tell, it's not really a thing in the Silmarillion or in any of Tolkien's writings. Like, Melkor is defeated, and after he's defeated, he is, he's banished from the physical realm, and then Sauron kind of stays in Middle Earth, and he kind of hides in Mordor. He kind of swears that he won't do wrong again. He won't follow Melkor. He won't be evil. but then he kind of hides away and goes back on that, and that's where you get the kind of the forging of the rings of power, because he is able to take a fair form
Hmm.
and tries to trick the
Mm-hmm.
elves and the dwarves and the men and with the rings. And it's called the Rings of Power, so I'm guessing that it will be part of that. But I was confused because they set Sauron up as like the main enemy of the elves.
Yeah, the big bad.
Yeah, in the Silmarillion, he actually walks among the elves and helps them forge the rings and tricks them with the One Ring. Um, and so I was kind of confused how that fits into the timeline. And
So one of the things I think that I'm hearing you say is kind of a push against this idea of using the word peace, like that. There really weren't times of peace. Maybe that's not what you're saying, but I think that from the perspective of the elves, that they're telling themselves and trying to tell others there's a time of peace, when in reality, what's actually going on behind the scenes, especially with Sauron, is it's a time of pause and regrouping, and the impact that can have. And Galadriel's character talks about that a few times, and her character is maybe more motivated by war than vengeance than um, feels appropriate. But I don't know.
yeah, it's just trying to find.
Hunter, I've got a quote for you. As you're
Mhm.
looking for a quote, um, this is a quote. I was reading an article this week. A friend sent me from the Dispatch. It's called "It's Time to Remember Tolkien. The Shadow is a Small and Passing Thing" by David French. And talks about Tolkien, and it talks about um, George R. R. Martin. But uh, the piece that I'm going to quote from it is actually just a quote from Lord of the Rings that it's on Shadows and Light. So this is written from Sam's perspective while he and Frodo struggle, hopeless, through the heart of Mordor on their fool's errand to destroy the ring. There, peeping among the cloud rack above a dark tor high up in the mountains, Sam saw a white star twinkle for a while. The beauty of it smote his heart as he looked up out of the forsaken land, and hope returned to him. For like a shaft, clear and cold, the thought pierced him that in the end the shadow was only a small and passing thing. There was light and high beauty forever beyond its reach. That to me is Tolkien, or a large part of Tolkien. And let's be honest, Sam is probably the wisest or second wisest character in all of Tolkien's writings. Um, and his way of understanding that shadow and light. It just
Hmm.
it warms me. What do you got for me, Hunter?
Well, I was sent that article as well, uh, and I mean it's kind of about the like cultural moment in TV where you have House of Dragon versus Rings of Power, and I've as you can tell about the way I ramble, I'm still kind of confused about this whole how to articulate what I'm feeling, um, because I think our reaction to TV especially, I think, is to almost immediately turn it into a cultural conversation
Mm.
about uh, current events, and it's not that you can't apply Tolkien to current events and cultural moments. But that was not Tolkien's goal. And when I was reading that article, I felt that um, it was more about current events than it was about Tolkien and George R. R. Martin. And I don't want to talk too much about the article, but I came across this quote by Tolkien, which is, I think, fairly well known. It's about allegory and what he thinks about allegory. And he says, I dislike allegory, the conscious and intentional allegory. Yet, any attempt to explain the purport of myth or fairy tale must use allegorical language. And, of course, the more life a story has, the more readily will it be susceptible of allegorical interpretations. While the better a deliberate allegory is made, the more nearly will it be acceptable just as a story. And I think it gets at this sort of confusion that I feel when I see or hear Tolkien talked about as sort of like, because you have to use allegorical language. You have to say, well, he's talking about good and evil. He's showing his Roman Catholic worldview, and he's giving us this picture of the world that, yes, there's evil, but good will triumph in the end. And but if you think about like myths, which I think is the genre that Tolkien really kind of is closest to, myths are not meant to be, in my opinion, I guess, myths are not meant to be applied, and they're not meant to, make allegories to what's happening right now at this time. Myths are meant to be remembered. And it's not that they're like Orpheus and Eurydice, where Orpheus goes into underworld to rescue Eurydice, and Hades says that he can take Eurydice out of the underworld as long as he doesn't look back. Eurydice has to walk behind him. He can't see or hear her, and it's, they have to walk out of Hades. And as long as Orpheus doesn't look back, he'll make it out. But just at the end, when he's closest to reaching his goal, he looks back. And, a lot of people's reaction will be, well, why did he look back? Why didn't he just keep walking? That's a plot hole. That's not the point, though. The point is that, there's a lot of different points you can make, but I think the one that I think of the most is that it's kind of and this is the language of allegory that I'm talking about. It is a symbol of human frailty, and that we often look back. We often make mistakes that we know that we shouldn't, but we do it anyway. And there's a lot of other things to say about it, but myths are kind of like, they're mysterious. I think when you're talking about a myth, talking about Tolkien, it's kind of the point, and one of the reasons that I love it so much is that it's not really meant to be understood. It confronts mystery and mortality. And when I read Tolkien, I feel a sense of awe that I don't really get anywhere else. and not a lot of other stuff.
And that's what you get from
The,
this. Sorry, you finish.
no, I'm sorry. I was just going to apologize for my long tangents, but I guess the whole point of a podcast is to have tangents.
I was about to say that's one of the things you'll get from Raise a Glass is many mundane stories turned into deeply introspective thoughts and communications on the world around us, even when the communication around the world about the world around us is that the communication about the world around us being used from a show should not actually be used to communicate about the world around us. Did I get that one right?
Yeah, this sentence is false.
Well, Hunter, I have really enjoyed having this conversation with you. I think it's a good example of the conversations we have. I think there might have been less disagreement than in other conversations we have, and it makes me more excited to talk about whatever we decide to talk about next together, because I appreciate your thoughts always. It sounded like you would not raise a glass to the show yet. I'm gonna
I'll
let
drink
my
a glass for this show.
I'm gonna let mine my thoughts be kind of held back until I see more of it. I hope the show continues in the feel of Tolkien, even if the story doesn't tell the Tolkien story. And who knows what characters we'll meet along the way. Hopefully we'll meet many exciting ones. And hopefully there'll be many moments where people are astounded by the endurance and the strength of characters that are seen to be weak and are seen to be of little value. Because I think Tolkien does a great job of lifting up the least of these continually. And maybe that's something that we can work on doing in our lives as well.
I agree.
Well, Hunter, do you have an idea of what we're going to talk about next week?
I have no idea.
I have an idea that I wanted to bring up to you,
Okay.
if you're willing to hear it out.
Yeah.
This doesn't have to be what we decide upon, but I thought it might be interesting to do an introduction to Russian literature next week, where
Ooh.
we might not talk deeply about a lot of different works, but I would love to do that. I have a few reasons
Yeah.
why. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I don't think I would consider myself well read enough to do like introduction to Russian literature, but I do
Good point.
love Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, and I've read both of them, and I've read a Solzhenitsyn book, but I would love to talk about those, especially Dostoevsky, or Tolstoy. But
Well, I'm going to send you maybe a short story or two that I read in college, and part of the reason I'm thinking about this is my Russian lit professor in college just recently passed away, and I found this out relatively recently. And I only took one course with him, but it was a course that introduced me to Russian literature, which I know that you have introduced yourself to in the last few years. And it is its own literature unto itself. I also do not feel anywhere near qualified to speak to the genre as a whole. And I'm sure there are many, many subgenres within it. But there are a few, and I say short stories because we can maybe as we go on, and as I finally at some point in the next couple of years finish War and Peace, and we can talk about some of these other major works that have defined not just Russian literature, but literature. And maybe we can lead from that and talk about musicals and talk about some other pieces. But there's a couple short stories that I remember reading in his course, in his class, that both made me laugh and made me think, and might be a couple helpful starting places for us.
Yeah.
Would you be interested in that?
Yeah, definitely. I adore Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. I've been feeling the itch to read some Dostoevsky again, even though I'm already reading like 5 different books at the same time. Just like, I need some Dostoevsky in my life again.
Perfect. Well, would you be okay if I close this out today?
Yeah, well, I had some Elvish that I thought
go
could
for it, please.
close us. And it is Ellen Sala Lumen Omentielvo. The star shines on the hour of our meeting. Apologize for my pronunciation.
No, I love it, and I don't know enough to correct you. So as we head out today, I know last week we were listening to some music that Hunter wrote and we played together. I wanna just leave you with some of the beautiful introduction to the Fellowship of the Ring, as recorded by The Mind's Eye.
For magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in Hobbiton. Bilbo was very rich and very peculiar, and had been the wonder of the Shire for 60 years, ever since his remarkable disappearance and unexpected return. The riches he had brought back from his travels had now become a local